One of the things that we do uniquely well is we hire great talent, but we CapEx the business very well. Tremendous amount of resources and money flow into funding unique ideas, whether that's around automation, innovation, reliability. What does the technical footprint of this company look like? And we're never afraid to invest in ideas that can make that even better.
Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. Welcome back to the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. Our guest this week is the president and chief executive officer of a very well-known company in the state of Michigan, Gentex. We're so happy to welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, Mr. Steve Downing. Steve, thanks for taking some time for us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk first just about Gentex in general. It's a company that in so many ways is synonymous with the word evolution. You started as a fire protection company. Later, you entered the automotive and the aerospace markets. So just familiarize our audience a bit about the array of products and solutions that Gentex offers to your customers.
Absolutely. Like you mentioned, Matt, the founding of the company was really as a fire protection safety company. And then really our evolution into automotive was really out of the legacy of what we did in fire protection. So it was a sensing-based company focused on, fire and using LEDs to help detect smoke. And really, we took that same type of sensing capability, and that's what led into our first automotive products, which were sensing light and glare, and then adjusting mirrors based on that sensory capability. From then, really the evolution of the company has been both a growth trajectory based off of adoption of that safety product, but then also using our core location to help us further expand our sensing products and also electronics capability.
So an incredible evolution for the company, and you use that term sensing so many times. And as we're going to get into the discussions today, this whole idea of smart technology, smart sensors, smart devices is evolving and creating evolution in so many different market spaces, automotive included. And we're going to have a really interesting conversation about that. For those of our listeners who don't live in the state of Michigan, of course, we have a national audience. Tell us what the culture of Michigan manufacturing is like and what it's like being a tier one automotive supplier in the car capital of the world.
That's a great question. Honestly, one of the most impressive things about the state is it's well known as a great manufacturing state. And it truly is a great manufacturing state, and what it's like to be close to your customers, to innovate with them. But the part of the engineering and the innovation that is often overlooked isn't just on the product that's sold to the customer. It's also on the manufacturing floor. How do you not only design these products and engineer products that are unique, creative, and will resonate with the consumer and an OEM, but then how do you put the skill set in place on the shop floor to design, produce, manufacture all those products? And for us, 2/3 of our sales are exported out of the country, all manufactured in the state of Michigan. And so what we have to do is you're competing very strongly with engineering and tech focus to make sure that you're cost competitive out of the state of Michigan to the rest of the world.
I didn't realize that 2/3 of your revenue is generated outside the United States. That's really impressive. And obviously credit to the innovation that's taking place at Gentex. When most people think of innovation, like we said, they think about engineers. They also think about innovation in the automotive space by companies like Tesla, General Motors, what's now called Stellantis, formerly Chrysler, and so on. But so many of these new technologies stem not just from the OEMs, but the suppliers to those OEMs. I think the same could be said of the aerospace market as well.
Yeah, you're fundamentally right. I mean, one of the tricky parts of our industry is you have very large automotive OEMs and aerospace OEMs that we partner with. So you got to make sure you're meeting their requirements, that you're disciplined, but you have to be innovative and creative to bring them new technologies. And really, that partnership has really started to expand even more in terms of the industry. So what used to be a very top-down industry has really become more push-pull. And what we're excited about is that's a type of mentality and relationships we look for out of our customers. customers. And it's really put us at the forefront of some of the new cutting edge technology, is the ability to go in with creative ideas. We joke all the time with our customers, listen, if you have a problem, we love to talk about problems rather than already imagined solutions. So talk about a problem. I always joke we're a weird company in nowhere, Michigan. We're going to bring a very different perspective of how we think that problem could get solved. And so one of the things that we try to pride ourselves on, and we believe do very well, is the ability to come into an OEM and sit down with a very unique approach to how to solve a problem. And what is nice about that from an OEM standpoint is typically not only do we have a unique solution, but we know how to manufacture it, build it, and get it from, all the way from ideation to completion, all in-house.
And it really becomes a key differentiator for you in a competitive environment when you can go to that customer and show how you can add value, not just by world-class manufacturing, but also by solving problems that they have, or maybe even problems that they don't even know they have, but that are coming down the pike. That's a really, really intriguing space in which to do business. We're on the heels of two major automotive shows. SEMA 2021 took place last November. That was just 4 or 5 months ago. CES 2022 in January of this year. And for our listeners that don't know, these are shows where a lot of the folks that are doing business in the automotive market, whether it's tier 1, tier 2, the OEs themselves, really unveil some of the amazing innovation that's taking place in the development of their product and the development of their process. So what are those things that our listeners should have their eyes on with regard to the future of automotive innovation and some of the things that we'll be seeing in the next year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
I'll try to limit it to just a few product categories.
Perfect.
One is on digital vision. So if you look at what Gentex has done historically with mirrors, about 5 years ago, we really started to move very heavily into displays. And that is a combination, both a mirror and a display product. We call it full display mirror, or FDM. And really what we showed at CES this year was some ideation around what the next several years could look like for that product. So it's well entrenched with many OEMs in the marketplace already, but we really wanted to show what would the forward look of that product be. So we showed some transparent concepts all the way up through some bent and shaped molded glass and display concepts that could really fit an OEM and their design execution that they're looking for. The other area, like I mentioned earlier, like on the sensing side, one of the things we're really focused on is how do we create further out and futuristic version of sensing that's going to be necessary in the car of the future. And so we showed a lot of concepts around some new technologies that we've been working on and what that can offer not only the OEM, but also a ride-sharing customer or consumer, how it could help and assist in their life and what that interaction with the vehicle will be like. One of the others that we've shown is our core dimming technology is what moved us into the aerospace market on the Boeing 787. If you've ever been on that plane, there's dimmable windows instead of window shades. That's our technology. What we've been showing at CES is executions of that type of technology all over the vehicle. So whether that's dimmable visors, sunroofs, side windows, different concepts, and especially it can be used today, obviously, in the vehicle, but even in a fully autonomous vehicle of the future, the ability to control light aperture as a passenger in that vehicle is increasingly important. And then the last real tech that we focused on in this show was really a driver and cabin monitoring system that's looking not only at monitoring the driver from a safety standpoint as the vehicle moves from stage 1, 2 to stage 5, that readiness of a driver to take over control of the vehicle in a semi-autonomous state, but also the ability to look at the entire cabin of the vehicle and look for objects left behind. In this demo, what we showed was some very high-end electronics that were showing how you could notice a baby left behind in a vehicle, even if it's rearward facing. So it's looking at micro vibrations in the vehicle, detecting, the vibrations that would be created by a child breathing, for instance, in a rearward facing car seat.
One of the things that occurs to me, Steve, is we're having this conversation, and especially as I have conversations and discussions with folks that maybe aren't as familiar with the technology in an autonomous vehicle, as an example, because a lot of them are scared of it. And they think about how in the world could we ever live in a world where we would trust an autonomous vehicle to take us from point A to point B. And the truth of the matter is you're talking about some of these technologies, in many ways, they actually create a safer environment as opposed to a more dangerous one. So it is going to be interesting to see that technology roll out, whether it's the light aperture technology that you talk about, core dimming technology, sensing, digital vision, a really exciting time to be in the world of automotive. And I think so many of these things, in fact, all 4 of them in many ways, and you already made the point, lend themselves to this world of evolving autonomous vehicles I just read an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago that Waymo, which for our listeners who may not know is Google, now Alphabet's autonomous vehicle company, just announced that it will send fully autonomous vehicles into the city of San Francisco for use by Google employees. We have a subsidiary of Gentex's customer, General Motors, known as Cruise. They began offering driverless rides to the public in the city of San Francisco earlier this year. So what are your thoughts on the future of autonomous transportation, and how does Gentex go about planning for market disruption in this space?
Yeah, if you look at the products I just rolled through, really most of those have been created in the last 5 years, and the concepts have been built in the last few years. They're really designed around that vehicle evolution, looking at what is a car today, what is it going to become, and what are the enablers that don't exist to help make that actually practical. And that's where our sensing technology idea came from. In other words, what people often don't think about is in a ride-sharing environment, the vehicle is not necessarily owned by you, but in a ride sharing concept, I'm going to get out of that vehicle, Matt, you're going to get in next. It's going to lack the olfactory senses that are required to know, is that vehicle arrived to you in the condition that it should be in, if there's not a driver or a passenger in it. And so what we're trying to do is use technology to help create that same environment so that an owner of that vehicle can guarantee you when it arrives to you, it's in the condition it should be in. There's a big gap in technology just in that side alone, but also in the ability to look at identification, making sure the right person's getting in the right vehicle to guarantee you that it delivered you at the right location safely. There's a tremendous amount of unknowns when there's not a human there. So it's more than just getting the vehicle to that spot. How we came up with this concept was actually we did an initial investment with a fully autonomous vehicle company in Grand Rapids. And what we did was we put sensors in the vehicle when they were doing their beta tests to look at what is the use case. How do we collect the data that's necessary to understand what's going to happen in this environment, and how do we go about help solving some of those problems by collecting that data first in a kind of a placebo environment before it gets into the real world. And so it's something that we've looked at very carefully. We know there's a tremendous amount of capital and companies rushing towards operating the vehicle itself. We believe that our skill set was better suited to help fill the gaps of once it is driving itself, what else information and data is going to be needed that doesn't exist today.
And I think that's a great lesson when we think about highest and best use for company time, for company resources, and thinking about, rather than necessarily coming up with the next best perfect mousetrap, it's what are all the things that go around that mousetrap and making it work in exactly the way that it needs to. You brought up the concept of ride sharing a couple of times already today, and there's so many applications when we think about a world in which maybe many of us won't even own a vehicle and we'll just rely on some form of a subscription service for a vehicle to show up at our house and take us to a restaurant, show up at school and take us home, whatever that application is. So really exciting things on the horizon at Gentex as you look at how you can use the technologies that you are innovating in and finding ways to bring those to bear in the world of autonomous vehicles. I want to turn our attention now with Steve Downing, who's the president and chief executive officer of Gentex Corporation, a little bit about careers and culture when it comes to business. Now, Gentex was named a 2021 Supplier of the Year by General Motors. That's nothing new for you. That was the 23rd time that your company had been recognized with this award. When you think about creating sustainable performance over time, and especially being a public company in a financial world that focuses much more on quarters than quarter centuries, Steve, what are the keys to creating that sustainable performance?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think it is the hardest balancing act for us, which is as a publicly traded company, you have these quarterly conference calls. I have one next week, for instance, that we'll be posting earnings on, and the street does tend to be very short focused. What we try to approach everything in our business, both with employees and with customers, and even the street the same way, which is brutal honesty. And so what we try to be very clear about with our shareholders is that we're investing for the long term. A lot of our ideas are 5 to 7 years out, and we're going to take that approach, and nothing's going to stray us from that course. And on the tech side of the world, as a tech supplier in a very heavy industrial industry, you have to be willing to live with those gaps in performance. And obviously, the industry is going through a very difficult time. We continue to double down and making sure that we're investing for the future. We know that the rewards for that won't pay out in the next year or two. I mean, those are 5 to 7 year bets that we're placing. And so it's an interesting time, obviously, to be in the industry. I believe there's the most potential ever in this industry right now. I've been at Gentex for this summer will be 20 years. And I would tell you that in my 20 years here, I believe the next 5 to 10 years are the most exciting times I've seen for the company.
That's a really interesting statement when you say that the most potential for the company, perhaps in its history, is coming in that next 5 and 10 years. What a great time to be in technology. What a great time to be running a company like Gentex. What do you think makes Gentex an especially appealing place for people to work as you look at how you fill the gaps in talent that every other company is dealing with at this point in time?
Yeah, I would say what's really unique about our culture and company is that if let's say you're an engineer coming into your first job out of college, one of the things that we do uniquely well is we hire great talent, but we CapEx the business very well. Tremendous amount of resources and money flow into funding unique ideas, whether that's around automation, innovation, reliability. What is the technical footprint of this company look like? And we're never afraid to invest in ideas that can make that even better. And so if I'm a young degreed engineer, one of the things I would rarely do, probably even college kids know to ask though, is, okay, you're recruiting great talent, but are you going to give them the resources necessary to allow them to do their jobs effectively? And I think that's what actually separates us as a company. If you're an engineer, is that we actually fund those ideas very well. So it gives you opportunity to not only have an idea, but then to execute it and see it to fruition and see the impact it can make. And then obviously when you combine that with the product pipeline of not only are you going to be working on the same things we've been making for the last 5 or 10 years, but the new products and the new innovation come with the need for whole new creative ways of engineering manufacturing solutions around those.
Both of those are really, really interesting points. And I would agree wholeheartedly on the whole idea of being able to CapEx great ideas and innovation. If you're a young engineer that's coming out of a program, mechanical engineering, manufacturing engineering, electrical engineer, and you have dreamt your whole life of being in this world of innovation, and then you walk in the front door of a company that can't afford to fund the ideas of the people in the organization that are expected to innovate, that's a huge constraint on advancing your own career, enjoying the work that you're doing. So I'm just going to echo that statement that you just made, which if you're in that mode, and we have a lot of students that are, engineering students at universities, maybe even technicians, automation technicians at our community colleges. That's a great question to ask in the interview is how is this company going about funding the work of innovation? What percentage of your annual revenue is dedicated to research and development and innovation? Really, really interesting questions. And I'm glad that you brought that up. As we think about these careers, and I mentioned some of the more typical ones, manufacturing engineer, electrical engineers, the world of manufacturing, I think sometimes Steve doesn't get the credit that it deserves for just the incredible range of career opportunities that we offer. I'm sure that Gentex employs software engineers, hardware engineers. I know you have chemists, manufacturing and engineers as mentioned, and technicians. Those are just a few. But what are some of the more interesting and less known careers that are available to people at a company like Gentex?
Yeah, I think you hit a lot of them, but if you look at the chemistry side, because it's not only a chemist, but chemical engineers, physicists, applied materials experts. We do all of our thin film coating in-house. So very vertically integrated company. We need expertise in microelectronics and electronics and wire bonding, CMOS imager manufacturing. And these are all very rare jobs, and not only in the state, but really in the country. And then combining them all into an automotive supplier is obviously very unique. And that's all kind of on the product side. And then behind the scenes, you have a tremendous amount of other skill sets, anything from IT to accounting, financial services, business development, business planning. A tremendous amount of our world is becoming around, ERP systems and infrastructure. And so those are all growing areas. And as the company grows and expands, our ability to serve our customers globally will require even more of those resources as well.
So another couple of fascinating points. I know you engaged with a number of engineering universities, and I worked with one particular one where we did a survey of our incoming freshmen in the engineering programs and just said, what was the reason that you chose your particular discipline of engineering? And I mean, the answers were, well, my dad was an electrical engineer, so I'm going to be an electrical engineer. Or my neighbor is a manufacturing engineer, I chose that. Or I had to pick something, and this is what my career advisor at high school thought I should pick. And then you get into some of the titles that you just went into and some of the permutations of engineering around materials, around chemistry. And there's really this whole plethora of opportunities for our STEM students as they choose their careers. So to those that are listening today, I think one of the pieces of advice is to really listen to what Steve Downing just said. And that is there are all these other disciplines within engineering that create incredible career pathways. I would also comment anecdotally, typically the more rare a position and the more specialized, the better it pays.
Mhm.
So spend a little bit of time doing that research and figuring out what those opportunities look like as we prepare the next generation of STEM talent and technical talent for the world of manufacturing. On that topic, the reason that we were introduced, Steve, was through a gentleman by the name of Dr. Bill Pink. For our listeners who don't recognize that name, Bill is the president of Grand Rapids Community College for a while. He's quickly moving to Ferris State in a similar role there, and we're excited for Bill and where his career is taking him. But he was our initial conduit to the relationship with you. And he appeared on our podcast last year. I think it was last July or so. He speaks incredibly highly of you, by the way. Tell us about your partnership with Grand Rapids Community College and the other education institutions with which you work closely.
Yeah, I think, well, first I'll clarify, Bill lost in golf to me. So that was the payout, is he had to say something nice about me. But no, all joking aside, what I loved about Bill, he's a visionary when it comes to the interaction of colleges and universities with employers. And so what he was looking to do is expand GRCC's campus into the Lakeshore area closer to us. And so he was looking for some financial support. And so Bill and I began to kind of spitball some concepts around what could that look like. And so we went and came with a very large donation to help fund his expansion process. What I was looking for was a couple things. Number one, I have a whole lot of hourly folks who work here that really could benefit from a community college in our backyard. And so how do we get access to our employees of a great community college with a great vision? But I wanted to be able to help mold and shape what those classroom settings were going to look like and what they were going to be teaching that would really fit us as an employer more closely. And then the second aspect of it was also, if I have an employee walk in and say, hey, I'm interested in taking a class, there's a tremendous amount of choices you can make. How do we as an employer help control the curriculum and say, here's a list as a Gentex employee, where do you work? What do you do? What are you interested in? Here's a truncated version of a syllabus that will help take away some of the unknowns and really direct that classwork around something that can really not only benefit the person, but also help us as an employer make sure people are getting the education that really is applicable to the job they're doing. And so Bill has been working with us on a specialized curriculum, even working to the point where we may be able to create our unique certificates for our employees that they can get something halfway to a degree to allow them to see the progress and then obviously the accomplishment that goes with that hard work.
And I hope that answer that you just gave, which was a great one, by the way, resonates with our educators that are on with us today. You touched on a couple of things. You talked about a large donation, which, I'm not that I can thank you on behalf of Grand Rapids Community College, but on behalf of the world of our community colleges and technical colleges, thank you to Gentex for being willing to step up. And what I say is put your money where your mouth is and talk about how we can build these partnerships. But it's not just around the donation. And I think that was at the heart of your answer is, yes, we're willing to step up with our treasure. We're willing to support these, but we want to talk about how we can mold and shape, in your words, those programs that our potential employees and probably even our current employees are going to be able to participate in. We want to be a part of helping control and develop that curriculum so that we know that what the students are learning while they're going through that education pathway has applicability when they get to manufacturing. The other thing you mentioned there in that answer was the idea of unique certifications. And that is a trend without question that we are seeing across, especially community colleges and technical education. Is associate degrees are great. Tech diplomas are awesome. But the other thing that we can plug into that is really, really specific certifications that apply to specific employers. That's a huge movement that we talk about here on the Tech Ed podcast and something that I hope resonated with our listeners as well. I want to turn now to more of the engineering level and engineering graduates that you work with. You have a program, it's called a production support engineer program that really piqued our interest as we were doing a little bit of research about how you mold and create the workforce of the future. Steve, how does that program help transition students from school into the workforce and then set them on a successful career pathway?
One of the things we've worked really hard on over the last few years is getting better at internship programs of talent across the board in the company. This year, this summer coming up, we're on pace to have over 120 interns at the company, varying degrees of, finance all the way to industrial engineering to production, design. And so one of the goals with that is to create an opportunity for students, younger students, especially in college, to see the company for what it is, to get their hands dirty, to get to experience different jobs. It's not uncommon for a college student to change their mind about what field they would like. The best way for them, in my mind, is to see what the job actually is, get an experience in it, and see what other jobs are. Because what you may find is what you thought you loved wasn't actually your passion when you had to do it for a summer. Or more importantly, if you see another job, you may find out it's very exciting and lucrative and something that you want to pursue. We try to start then. And then over time, if you have great success in the intern program, many of those people end up becoming full-time employees when they graduate. And that's when, an example of our production support engineer, the program's actually pretty creative in that the young engineers will come in. Typically, they're working on engineering type products, whether it's industrial engineering or even what we would call, managing a line, like a group leader type role right out of college. And so for a lot of these engineers, it's their first time not only working in a practical engineering manufacturing environment, but for a lot of them, it's going to be their first time managing people. And so what that allows them to do is not only do the engineering side of the job, but also get some of that management experience that is so critical in your career earlier on. And then from there, you get to see the products and build the products and help design the manufacturing process. And so what's awesome about this feeder system is even if you want to be a design engineer longer term in your career, this gives you an experience to see what a poor design looks like in manufacturing. And as you make that progression throughout your career, you have that life experience to say, I know what people are struggling with on the floor. I have the relationships. I've seen it play out in real time. How do I make sure I'm engineering not only for the best finished product, but from a manufacturability standpoint? And so that becomes our feeder system for engineering throughout the rest of the company, is spending some time in operations, learning our operations and managing people.
It's almost reminiscent in some ways. I think about Nordstrom, which obviously a retail company, totally different space. I don't know if they do it anymore, but for years, one of their requirements for any new employee at any level was that you had to work in the retail environment for a period of time. You had to go out in the showroom on the floor and realize what drives the business. And in so many ways, this production support engineer program sounds kind of like the same thing. Like we've got to get our engineers into what I always call the gemba. It's a Japanese word for where the action happens. The word we use in lean manufacturing quite often. And that was always my philosophy as well. When we would hire new people, it didn't almost really matter what part of the business in the manufacturing world. We wanted to get them out onto the shop floor, understand how an order flows from coming into a customer to leaving inspection and going back on a truck, every single step of that process. Because I think it makes for a better team member and a better employer. Not every manufacturing employee comes from the world of STEM and engineering, though, right? I mean, you're an example of that. You've got a really, really strong finance background, and you lead a company that's really, really technical. So for students that maybe don't have a STEM degree, aren't on a STEM pathway, they're not going through engineering or physics or chemistry, what advice would you have for those folks in terms of taking different areas of study and then putting those skills and gifts to work in a technology company?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll actually take the inverse of that question too and say, one of the recommendations I have for engineering students young is to take a corporate finance class. Take one class while you're finishing your degree. Take a corporate finance class, take a forensic accounting class, take something that allows you to understand the business side just a little better, especially as you progress and you're going to get into management at some point in your career. And the biggest Achilles heel of a great engineer is going to say, I don't understand the budgeting process or how this all rolls up into an income statement or the impact of a balance sheet on the income statement. And so, one class would go, 1,000 miles for them in the terms of their career and basic understanding. So you can speak the language. I joke, as an automotive supplier, we speak in acronyms all the time because that makes me feel smart. But, honestly, every industry, every job has acronyms. And so if you can get familiar with the lingo and the language, it really can help you as an engineer understand the bigger picture better versus just the technical side of the business. For a non-STEM type person, what I always recommend is do the same thing, learn more about what's happening. And then you have to be intrinsically curious when you come into, especially like the one I'm in, a heavy engineering company. It just so happens to fit my style and approach, right? I've always loved science and math. So it was easy fit for me. When I went to college, I was actually a pre-med major and quickly learned that I was told by a couple of great professors that I would have terrible bedside manner and I should probably consider a different career. So I did, and that worked out very well. But what I would look at and say, hey, I took C++ in college, right? I mean, you should try to take something technical besides just business, so that you take an engineering class, take something to help you familiarize yourself, not only with the subject matter, but with the personalities that are in those classes. Because it is a different approach to not only problem solving, but it's a different personality in general. And so the more you can surround yourself with that, the better off you'll be in terms of understanding how a group of 15 electrical engineers are going to attack a problem versus, say, 15 finance people. And neither one's necessarily right or wrong. They're different angles to the same conclusion, but it can come across as if you're speaking different language. So if you can get your experience, if you can take a little bit, just enough to get your foot wet a little, it can really help you in your career, not only on both sides of that, whether you're highly technical, understanding the finance side, or if you're a finance guy, making sure you're understanding a little bit more about the engineering world and where it's coming from.
When I was running continuous improvement and Kaizen events in my years of manufacturing, one of the things that I always like to do was, make sure that we had every single or as many aspects of the business spoken for on that Kaizen team. For our listeners not familiar, that's the process we use in manufacturing to improve a process, drive waste out of a process, improve customer experience. There's a specific approach to it. But I always, if we were dealing with a manufacturing problem, yes, I wanted the engineers there. But to bring somebody in from accounts payable, or bring somebody in from customer service or business development that have totally different ways of looking at things, totally different ways of solving problems, totally different understandings of the customer experience, that was where the best solutions came from. And I think what I'm hearing in your answer, Steve, is that there's a huge benefit of that in the world of business and the world of manufacturing. But if you're a non-STEM individual, the more STEM related experience and exposure you can get on your education pathway, the more valuable you'll be. Your point about an engineer being able to understand their way around a balance sheet and an income statement, understanding gross profit, understanding the direct margin, understanding contribution margin, and really getting a feel for what it is that drives the business and how the decisions and activities in which they engage are going to tie to financial performance. So I think some really, really good advice there, both to the heart of the question about these students that are maybe non-STEM related, but also a great answer on those students who are, and how we create a really, really well-rounded individual coming out of an engineering program, coming out of a finance program. If we turn the clock back now with our final question for Steve Downing, not from the higher education standpoint, but all the way back to high school. If we think about a sophomore in high school, and this is a question that we ask every single guest here on the Tech Ed podcast, Steve, if there was one piece of advice that you could give to a high school sophomore as they consider their future, what would that piece of advice be?
I'll answer this one if I were talking to myself when I was a sophomore. How about that? That way it's
perfect,
less insulting maybe. But I think what I would tell myself is, you have no idea what the world's actually like, nor do you actually have any idea of what you really want to do, nor what you're good at. And so you need to go see. And so one of the things as a company, I believe all companies need to do a better job of, is exposing business to schools, so that students can see the wide range of jobs, what kind of jobs are available, that if I have a certain interest in science, for instance, that there's a job for that. And what does that job look like? I think, if you're a young high school student, or even a young college student, you're going to change your mind a lot, because you just have it, and the world's evolving so quickly right now as relates to the workforce and Industry 4.0 that you mentioned, that go see as much as humanly possible. Never lose a chance to go tour a company or a factory or a facility or an engineering house. Just go see it and be inquisitive and ask questions, because you're going to learn a ton about what the world is actually like, what a day-to-day job's like. And so I think the more inquisitive you are as a human, and the earlier on you are inquisitive, the better off you set yourself up for success, because you're going to learn and see way more than someone who just, to your point, who grew up saying, well, this is what my dad did, this is what I'm going to do. And that may be what you're going to do, but there may be something that you truly are passionate about, that's something you never even thought of before until you get a chance to see it.
Perhaps the most succinct answer we've had to that question, 2 words: go see. I absolutely love that answer. To Steve's point, you have no idea as a high school sophomore. He didn't. I can tell you that I didn't. No idea what the world is like. No idea necessarily what you want to do. No idea what you are good at. So go out and see it, be inquisitive. That's one of my favorite words. And you've used it a couple times today over our discussion. We were inquisitive. We were interested to hear about everything that's going on at Gentex, to learn a little bit more about Steve Downing. I think without question, we accomplished that goal. Steve, I want to thank you for taking some time here on the Tech Ed podcast to share all this with us. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you like this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.